Great. Okay, so once again, welcome. We are going to hear in this breakout room from Joshua Barrow and Chloe Chattington. Joshua from the International College of Oriental Medicine, Chloe then from the College of Integrated Chinese Medicine. Joshua, I have the word to you.
Perfect. So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Perfect. So I guess I'm a little bit strange in that I'm a first year student. Well, was a first year student. I think because the term hasn't quite started yet. I still classify myself as a first year student, but it's really understanding my experience of observing student clinic, which was the first time this has happened. But first, a little introduction about me. As Peter Nicer said, I'm studying at ICOM, which is down in East Grinstead. It's been an incredible first year. It's kind of been nice having a summer break, but I'm looking forward to going into my second year. And my background's quite boring compared to acupuncture, working as a product manager for a startup and learning design before that. So instead I thought I'd put a picture of my little dog Django, who's a 5-month-old Jackapoo. So he's often a good distraction when I'm trying to study. So I just wanted to explain first of all, I thought this case was particularly interesting because it was the first time that a first year students had observed a student clinic. So typically the setup is we would go and observe a practitioner where you see kind of a bit of the pulses, you understand a little bit about the patient and you watch the treatment, but you don't really understand fully the full end-to-end process. So this was really exciting to see how a treatment actually happens. I'll then talk about the kind of the case history, what the treatment was, and then some of the key learning points that I found both in terms of the student clinic itself, but what I observed as well. So because of COVID, I guess it's a little bit more challenging to get into the student clinic or watching practitioners because we weren't able to practice. So this was the first time that as a first year student we could go in and watch second years, which meant that we could see the full diagnostic process. We could see the questioning, how a practitioner interacts with the patient. We can see when they do the body diagnosis, which we hadn't seen before. So for me, this was really just such an amazing experience to understand what would be leading up to what we'll be doing in second year, which I think you don't quite get the full measure of when you're just going in and observing a practitioner. So in terms of the setup, it was 2 second year students with one taking the lead in terms of, asking the questions, doing the diagnostics and really leading the process and one observing. We had one teacher who was making sure that they were doing the right thing, and we had one patient, of course, and then there was 2 first year students who were observing, and really our role was to watch and to listen, but we did have the opportunity to ask questions as well, which was quite nice, and we did get to feel some of the things which I'll come on to. So in terms of the case history, this was a male in his late 50s having his first acupuncture session, and it's kind of exciting because it was my first ever patient in student clinic observing, so it's good to see that, and as well as seeing how much of a good impact acupuncture can have, it was also interesting to see I observed a kind of a psycho-emotional change as well, where he came in it felt like an excess of fire, there was a lot of joy, there was a lot of kind of inappropriate laughter, and he left a lot calmer. And there's also one which I still kind of laugh about, where I learned a lot around common sense. So in terms of the medical history, he came in and his chief complaint was shoulder pain. He had quite a complex case history where he had had testicular cancer in 2019. It had been quite tough. Since then he'd had tinnitus issues, sinus issues, he'd had shingles. He had pain in his feet, and that was on the kind of the lateral side around the bladder meridian, and the way that he described the pain was that it felt like his shoes were too small and his toes were curling up, which when we looked wasn't the case. So it was more of a sensation than his shoes actually being too small. He had lower back pain, which he said was quite common with cancer patients, people going through chemotherapy. And as I mentioned, he'd had this excess of fire where it was quite a loud over joyful sort of emotional state, I noticed. The thing that I found particularly interesting as well is when one of the practitioners asked, when did this pain start happening? He spoke about how a couple of days ago he was helping one of his friends to move a whole load of washing machines, and I think he mentioned like 5 or 6. So you kind of start to think, well, there's kind of no surprise that your shoulders are hurting when you're doing that sort of heavy lifting. In terms of his lifestyle history, I mean, he was actually quite healthy, I thought. He had retired after he had the testicular cancer. He had a good appetite with a balanced diet. He ate more towards a vegetarian diet because that's what his girlfriend ate. But he had, an active lifestyle with tennis and golf. Energy levels were fine. He was a smoker, but had given up a while back. And he got around 6 hours of sleep a night, which is probably not quite the right amount, but still I thought kind of decent. Interestingly, he didn't have any problems before the chemotherapy. It all seemed to come after that, and with his family history as well, he said there's been no problems before. In terms of looking, one of the things that we noticed was his shoulders did look kind of anatomically, structurally not quite aligned, which might explain why he's suffering from that now. He had quite a large abdomen but small legs. His earlobes were small, which I thought were quite interesting. I guess with the ears kind of being, Huan Chi, Horse Chi, I wonder if they'd probably gone a bit smaller after what he's gone through. It would be maybe interesting to see, has that actually changed? Maybe try to see a picture of him before and see, has there been a difference? In terms of under the eyes, there's a bit of black but no puffiness, which may be a bit of a water imbalance there. And he had a red tongue, but more verging towards purple, and a white coating on the outsides. And in terms of the feeling, again, this is me as the first year observing the clinic, so the pulses don't necessarily have the most exciting of pulse qualities. So his pulse definitely felt quite strong and quite fast. It maybe a bit artificial in a sense that there was not a lot underneath that. The left hand side felt a little bit more superficial, and the lower pulses, especially the kind of the water, so the bladder and the kidney, felt particularly weak. As mentioned, he had pain on the lateral side of the feet, which we palpated. There was also 2 things where they'd had a bit of coloration, so a bit of redness around some kidney points, the 3 to 5, and he also had it felt like a sense of stagnation around liver 3, which is the first time I'd actually gotten to feel what that might look like when you're palpating. And when we asked him to show us where the pain was on the shoulder, it was around colon 15. So in terms of the treatment, again, this was, as a first year, this was me watching, so not necessarily choosing the points myself. And the thing that I found particularly interesting was that, especially as he was the first time acupuncture patient, really wanted to make sure that we were targeting that shoulder pain so that he would leave saying, hey guys, this has actually works, there's something behind this and I want to go back more. Which I think I would have had the temptation of looking at the difficult medical history and wanting to try and target some of the other problems as well. But some of the symptoms suggested in terms of the diagnosis, there was a problem in the wood channel, kind of that stagnation around liver 3 was particularly a clear indication of that. And on the pulse and both on the symptoms, there definitely felt like there was that water pulse was completely empty, so kind of bladder kidney needed a little bit of work. So that branch was to treat the shoulder pain, and the root was to strengthen the water, which would then start to feed that wood. And it was also, I guess, with the kind of the Cheng cycle, it's to also target that vertical axis of the water and the fire. So the points that were used was liver 3 to clear the stagnation and clear the channel. We used bladder 10, which was, I think it's also can be seen as bladder 40 if I'm correct, at other colleges. That was really to to relax the back and to work on the kind of the Tai Yang aspect as well. There's bladder 63, which was good for pain as it's the G cleft point. And then we had the local point of colon 15 as well to reduce the shoulder pain, and it's also good pain for any sort of shoulder pain. And we also used Ren 7 just to kind of work on the chi and blood as well, with a little bit of moxa to warm. So there's a lot going on really, kind of working on local, a bit of Taiyang, working on the chi and blood, and that vertical axis as well. So the outcome was happily a very happy patient. His shoulder felt better immediately. He noticed that he had a bit more mobility and a lot less pain. One of the things that I noticed as well was his Shen had seemed to calm. He was still quite joyful, I would say, but he was calm, he was a lot more quiet. I think he seemed a lot more rooted, which I guess is that water now supporting the fire. And I think the really good thing was that he immediately booked to come back for a second treatment, which was really, I think, one of the key aims and something that, we can then start to target the more deep-rooted problems. So in terms of the key learning points, just going to focus on two things really. I guess the first is what I've learned from the student clinic experience. And I think from the patient's perspective, I've observed practitioners before where their patient have said, I don't want someone observing me again. That's, puts me on edge. I think people buy into the fact that it's student clinic, so they're a bit more accepting, but he seemed to enjoy the experience of having more people. I think he found it a bit more entertaining, a bit more interesting, and certainly with the other patients that we saw, they didn't seem to show any negative signs towards 5 people essentially in the room alongside them. I know I'd feel a little bit intimidated with so many people in the room talking about my case history, but I think with the student clinic it makes it a lot easier. The year 2 students said it was more stressful for them. I think having 2 more people when they're just starting treating makes life a little bit more scary, but they said if they're expecting and wanting to see 3 people treating patients, they need to have that same vulnerability to have people watching them. So they were on board, and they really wished that they'd gotten the opportunity themselves to observe, because there's a lot of things which I think when you are observing a practitioner and you don't see the full process, I think there's a lot of things just like the mechanical, how do you ask the questions, how do you try and keep to the timings, it's quite easy to overrun, I think, or simple things, how do you get someone to the bed. And I think one of the main things was making sure that the patient's always at the heart of the care that we give. Because I think when you start treating and you get into the process, you're so focused on the treatment and what's going on and trying to diagnose what's actually happening that you kind of forget the patient. You don't always ask, are you comfortable? Are you warm enough? And these sort of simple things which really make a good experience for the patient. In terms of the teachers thought it was a great tool. Again, it's that getting some of the stupid, more mechanical things out of the way so that once we get into the treatment room ourselves, we are more fluid in how we operate and we're giving the patient the best experience. And I hope that this presentation in itself goes to show how much I valued it and how much my colleagues valued it as a kind of a learning resource in the first year. And I think for me, I guess it's this patient, but every patient, I think it's an adaptive process is the main thing that I learned. I don't know if it's ignorance or I hadn't really thought about it, but I always assumed that once you get to choosing points, you're trying to figure out which one is the best. But I think one of the key things that I learned was as you go throughout the process, you're almost subtracting points and you're taking points away. So you start with 365. And if the patient, for example, is a complete fire type, you don't want to use a fire point because that's just going to make, he doesn't need any more of that excess. So it's about taking the points away till you get to 20, 30 points that you could use, and it's only a matter of figuring out what is the best before getting right to the end and thinking, okay, how do I choose 4? And I think part of that as well is the adaptive process of being able to listen to the questioning. You start to understand what points could be good, being able to see the body diagnosis, what's going on. I think seeing the full end-to-end process really helps with that, whereas when we observe a practitioner, it's just going, they kind of seem to come up with 4 or 5 off the top of their head, which is always, you kind of think, how on earth do they do that? I think the third point I learnt was always focused on the main complaint. So again, with the complex history, I think it's easy to think, oh, let's target, some of the chemotherapy side effects, let's focus on, the foot pain. But actually, if they come in with one condition, they're there for that specific reason. So, making sure that you always focus on that rather than what you think is best for them. And I think the main thing I learned, especially with the kind of the stress of the first year and how difficult it can be, especially kind of if I work part-time alongside the course. But what can the patient teach us? I think he had obviously a tough couple of years with the testicular cancer and all of these side effects, and I think the thing I found amazing was how jolly he was. He seemed to have a real kind of lust for life. He just seemed to enjoy himself. I think the perseverance of going through that whole thing and still coming out the other side. I think the main thing that I learned was really, every patient that comes into the clinic room is there to teach us something new. And that to me was a really exciting, an amazing thing to be able to experience from this patient and to learn from, his outlook on life. And that was my case history. So I guess we'll go to Chloe now, who will be amazing, and we'll come back to questions at the end, I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much, Josh. That was brilliant, very illuminating. Just a brief question at this point. When did you see your first patient? Where were you in your first year?
So I was towards the end. So this would have been, I think, in June.
Okay.
So we understood some of the basics. I think there's still a lot that we haven't quite learnt yet. But
yeah. So you have been observing more since then.
Yeah. So I'd seen a lot of patients through observing practitioners. I think I'd done about 15 to 16 hours, and we've gone through a lot of the course. So I think it kind of felt like it was the right time to do it. I think if we'd done it sooner, we might have struggled to actually know what was going on. Whereas I think because it came in a little bit later, it was still probably like 70% there in terms of understanding the treatment and what was going on. But it seemed like a good time to come in.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Yes, indeed. We will have some time for questions for both of you. So welcome, Chloe, and thank you for volunteering, stepping forward as well. And I'm really looking forward to hearing a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen.
Great.
Hopefully it works. Okay. So that one. Can you all see that okay?
Yes, I can see that fine.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm Chloe Chattington, and my presentation is about clearing a misted mind and supporting the heart. So just a little bit about me. I'm in my 3rd year at CICOM. So I'm currently in clinic, and I've been in clinic since I think it was like end of March, start of April. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is one of my patients. He was my 2nd patient, and I still have him now. So I've had him for quite a while now, so that's really nice. And it's just talking about the progression and having a bit more of a complicated patient, and yeah, how I kind of went about it. So if we just go on to there we go. So just a bit of background information. My patient is a male. He's 37. He looks after his 14-year-old daughter on his own. She only sees her mum kind of every so often, and he's having a bit of issues actually with his daughter when he came in. I'll speak about that in a second, but he is on a disability allowance. So when I met him, he wasn't working. He's on this because at the age of 8, he had a brain hemorrhage, and he had a shunt put into his brain to access the fluid. and he managed to recover after a couple of months, which is amazing. But you can visibly see that he has had a stroke. Like some of his face is drooped, and he had to have surgery on one of his eyes because he couldn't blink. And his walk is kind of unsteady. It's he describes it as like a sort of stiffness in his leg, and there is kind of like a shake to him, like almost like a sort of agitation. So on first impressions, when he came in, so he'd already been coming into clinic before, so he kind of knew the sort of process slightly, but he came in and was like, he's really loud, and he's quite like a presence. He's quite a bullshit type guy. And so he came in like that. And but the first thing that I kind of noticed most about the patient is he doesn't breathe through his nose. So there's a lot of kind of phlegm going on. He gets phlegm at the side of his mouth as he's talking, which worsens through the treatment. Not through the treatment, like as he's in and he talks more. And he felt quite disconnected. He didn't feel his mind, body, his Shen, it felt quite agitated, and it felt a little bit all over the shop. So that was kind of one of the first things that I noticed. And as I sort of was saying about his daughter, he briefly mentioned that he was having some issues with his daughter. So obviously we just come out of lockdown, and I think he said that he felt like she didn't love him, that she didn't want him around. And because he didn't have much interaction with other people, I felt that that was really getting to him, because it was his kind of soul connection that he was getting, and that he just felt unloved basically and unwanted in his house. So his main complaint coming in was sciatica. He mostly felt it around gallbladder 30 and bladder 36, and it was on the left-hand side. The pain wasn't consistent, but it was quite throbbing when he would get it. But generally, he said that his legs felt weak, a bit stiff, and also quite heavy. His second complaint is that he feels like he's not breathing in his sleep, and that he wakes up with he's always got a dry mouth, like a dry throat, and constantly waking up in the night and then struggling to get back to sleep, waking up with very little energy. And again, when he was saying all this, I was like, yeah, I don't think you're breathing through. I didn't say, but I could see that he wasn't breathing through his nose. So I was like, obviously he's going to be getting that sort of dry throat, because it was just so blocked. There was so much catarrh going on in here. So that was the main complaint. Just real brief on some of the systems. He, as we sort of mentioned about the sleep, that wasn't great. His diet, he wasn't honest with me at the start, but from kind of more questioning, I realized he was on a family bar of dairy milk a day, which, you know, the dream, but not great. And lots of sandwiches, banana, kind of peanut butter, quite sort of damp forming food. He also admitted that he'd been drinking most days throughout lockdown. So and that was mainly cider, again, not ideal, with all of that sugar and aiding this kind of damp. Quite loose bowels. He said that he urinated quite a lot again, but I think he does drink quite a bit of fluid, but it was dark. He didn't really suffer from headaches too much. Didn't kind of, when I asked about that, he wasn't too, but he did say it's kind of mainly temples, and there was like a pressure. Dizziness seemed to be linked a lot to his lack of sort of mobility and his balance that he had. Again, his eyes were dry, but that was kind of coming from the fact that he had to sort of have surgery to make him blink. So I think that was kind of all linked in with that. And he'd smoked marijuana for 20 years. So yeah, a lot going on there. His pulses. So as a second patient, I was like, when I first felt his pulses, I kind of was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm feeling. But the thing is, with the patient's pulses, you can't quite obtain them there, as I would describe them, as muffled. Like, you just can't really get a grasp of what you're feeling. And again, I think it's like an overall slipperiness. It's like, oh no, is that? And it's like every time you go to feel it, it kind of goes. It was a really weird. So when it came to writing down the pulses, it was kind of, until I'd done the treatment, I didn't really feel like I got much from it, because again, it was just, I just couldn't quite grasp what was going on. and the tongue was swollen and it had phlegm lines, and there was like a sticky coat. Before I go on to the diagram, which is massive, he also had a lot of heat, so he was sweating a lot from his head, quite red in the face. Again, I think there was like a real block with that kind of head body connection. There was a lot of heat going on up here. He was constantly having to like dab himself. If I was doing points and things up here, it had to kind of like get rid of the sweat before I did it. So apologize for the diagram, it's very chaotic. However, so there's a lot of there's a deficiency, and clearly there's a lot going on with the wood from that kind of stroke, the the sciatica that he came in for. But what I was seeing and what I felt most from this patient was the phlegm. Again, seeing it, hearing it, it was his second complaint, and I just felt in his shen and it affecting his sleep. And I actually ended up diagnosing him as a fire CF, but that's not originally what he was when I went in, what he had been diagnosed as. So I kind of put this all together, and my main thing was phlegm. So before I kind of talk about why I did that, when in the clinic, if a patient's already been in and he's got previous practitioners, I don't know if it's kind of like as a sort of ease in, you kind of it went off what the previous practitioners had done. So, treated the sciatica on the first treatment, and they diagnosed him as an earth CF. So I did that. He came back and he said that the sciatica had eased, but it hadn't, like, it had only been for a couple of days and it came back. And again, just that kind of, again, the phlegm was very much present, and that's all I could kind of see. So I was like, right, he's coming for this. It's clearly not sticking. Sorry, Josh, I'm going to ignore the main complaint. And I'm going to clear phlegm, because that's what I feel like I'm seeing. I think that's what needs to be done. So I cleared the phlegm, and then he came back the next week. And what I feel had happened is, and at this point as well in that treatment, I was thinking, I don't think he's earth, I think he's fire, but we'll see. So I cleared the phlegm, and then he came back and he basically was extremely suicidal. He felt really down, he was crying. It's almost like I'd cleared something and that it made way for what was kind of underlining, which I felt was just his fire needing a boost. So he was really upset again. I don't think he had much community around him after lockdown. He'd been really alone. He'd been turning to alcohol, and I just felt that his fire needed supporting. So I cleared the phlegm on this one, and then this is when we began to treat the fire. I also got him in at 11:30 to 1 most weeks, like every week thereafter, so that I would have him in the time of fire as well. So the general sort of treatment plan was resolve phlegm, move chi, which would also help with the kind of the sciatica and the main complaint, clear some of this heat that was going on, and treat the fire. Some of the regular points that we used were below. We used an array. A lot of it was local points to kind of help to sort of descend some of this phlegm and get rid of the phlegm, and descend some of this sort of chi that was up here. And then it would be boosting his heart, and I would go between. I feel like he's more of a sort of small intestine triple burn side, but I would go between the two depending on how he was presenting on that day. And so although obviously he came in, and the main thing we're told is kind of go with the main complaint, what I really felt from the patient is just his need for community, his need for stability, and a lot of his issues I felt he could help himself with, but I didn't feel that he could help himself with until he was stable enough. And I felt that in order for him to be stable, his fire needed to be supported. So just for example, with his sciatica, I was asking him if he'd been doing much rolling, because if he had quite a stiff leg, I felt that some foam rolling on some of those muscle groups could really help him. And also he had been doing yoga before lockdown, but obviously that wasn't happening anymore. And I didn't know if he would go back with the kind of position that he was in. And I felt that all of these things that he could help himself outside of treatment. He would need his fire to be settled and his shen to be, you know, unmisted and to be safe for him to go ahead. And obviously with cutting out the alcohol, with cutting out the sugar, he needed to be doing that from a stable position. And that's why I kind of chose to go, okay, I know you've got sciatica, but I'm actually not going to treat that. So yeah, and it was really interesting to kind of see the progression of that. So mostly, yeah, we've kind of treated the phlegm, we've treated the heart. Obviously that's helped with his sleep as well. I'll go into kind of the outcome in a second. But yeah, I felt a lot of the things that weren't helping him was to do with his lifestyle as well. So some of the complications, before I kind of go to the outcome, is phlegm is really hard to move. It's really hard to move, especially when I think it's been quite a chronic condition. So it was a really hard case to have as my second one, because obviously it was so complicated. There was a lot of things going on, and so you don't see as much physical movement of the phlegm, and it has eased and there is a lot less there, but I had to look for more of what I could see him doing outside of that, and how I felt that the clearing of the phlegm and helping his fire CF had benefited him outside of that. So what lifestyle changes had he made? What was his mood like? What was his energy like? How was he coming into treatment? I had to look at that rather than his physical system, like his physical systems, because, you know, it was obviously still, his mobility still wasn't great. You know, it has been really hard to move, and also knowing which points to use. Do you always kind of stick with those kind of stomach 40? I use stomach 8 a lot, which worked quite nice for him sending things out. Like, do you stick to those points, or do you try lots of different points? You know, it's all been kind of a really good learning. It's been a really good learning tool for me. And just knowing how much you should clear and how much you want to tonify, because obviously there is a bed of deficiency there, but there is the phlegm has gone to excess, and it is a secondary cause of disease. So it is that kind of, you know, how much are you doing of each? And also another thing that I struggled with was feeling in charge of the room. So when I first met him, I thought he was quite woody, but then I realized that it was actually fire. He was quite sort of chaotic. He was quite uncontrollable. He was kind of in and out of his fire. It would dip. He was quite commanding of the room. Originally I thought that was wood, and then I realized that actually I think there's a lot of fire there, but I think he sort of felt like he used a bit of wood to kind of hide his vulnerable side, because as I said, after those only a couple of treatments, it all came out, and you really saw like his vulnerable, just that kind of need for connection, really, and that need to want of love. So yeah, that was kind of like that. Being in control of the room was quite difficult at times. Sometimes he would just get up and walk off if he saw someone that he knew, some people in the college. He would just get up and I'd be like, where have you gone? So yeah, that was always interesting. Anyway, down to the outcome. So he is no longer suicidal. He is much better. He said that he's feeling better than he has done in a really long time, which is great. He now has a job, so he's volunteering 3 days a week at a local charity shop. And what's good about that is he's not only got kind of that constant, he's doing something, he's constantly needed somewhere, but he's also getting all that interaction with customers. So that, I thought that was really good choice for him. And he hasn't really been able to keep a job down before. And he's had this for a while now, he's doing really well. Him and his daughter are much better. They're going out on lunches. He's been taking her to the coast. His family's a little bit further away, so he's been going to see his family with her. That has been amazing. And what's really nice is choosing regular places to take her. So he's now also feeling that community because he's becoming a regular at certain sort of cafes, or, you know, the different places that he's taking her. He's now becoming a regular. So he kind of feels like he's getting that community from there as well. The phlegm is still he's still struggling with breathing through his nose. But in terms of that phlegm around the heart and how it was affecting his fire, I feel like it is massively eased. He just feels so much more connected with himself. When he first came in, he was quite like, he wasn't well dressed, he was really late, he was kind of agitated. He didn't, although he was quite bolshy and quite, there wasn't like that kind of steady confidence to it. It was more of a kind of outward, like, you know, over sort of powering a vibe to it, rather than that kind of like, I'm doing this because I'm confident, I'm steady. But there's more of a steadiness to him now. He's always on time. In fact, he's normally early. He's well presented. He's cut out the chocolate, well, not fully cut out the chocolate, but he isn't eating a family-sized bar of chocolate a day now, just 1 or 2, and he's cut out alcohol. He'd already cut out the marijuana, but that's stayed consistent. He's not doing that. He's also more aware of himself and his diet and how that's affecting him. He said that he's realized that when he eats more chocolate, it does make it worse. So he's kind of making those links and becoming self-aware, which has been really great. His sciatica's gone. He had a slight little blip the other day where it kind of came back, but on average, it's pretty much gone now. And his sleep is much better. He says that he wakes early now, like a little bit earlier than he would like, but he's not constantly waking during the night. Again, he's still got that kind of dry throat, but until he can breathe through his nose, I think that's going to kind of be there. But yeah, he is doing much better and he's really great, and I'm very happy with the outcome. So yeah, that was my patient, and that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chloe. That was wonderful. Can I just briefly ask a question? How often did you see him, and how long have you seen him now for?
So I got him in like May. I think it was like mid towards the end of May, and he generally comes in every week, but not always. So I've been seeing him, from sort of mid to end of May until now. I've not seen him for a couple of weeks because we had a week off and he couldn't come in 1 week. But yeah, so it took a few sessions to kind of get that stability back in his fire, but I feel like we've kind of got that now, and now I can sort of start looking at some of the other areas where we might be able to help out and going back to the original diagram. So yeah.
Wonderful, great.
Yeah.
So I open up if anybody else would like to ask questions. Either put it into the chat room or just put your virtual hand up and unmute yourself when I can see you. So there have been a few comments. What an amazing case history, very heartwarming to see how much of an impact your treatment has made to the patient. I now think that I need to cut down on my chocolate consumption. There we go. Very impressive presentation, well done. Thank you, very inspiring, brilliant case history. Of course, there's also Josh's presentation, so please refer to either of these presentations if you have any questions or comments or other things you would like to put in here. Moment, nothing else is appearing.
One thing, sorry, unless anyone else got a question, Angie was with me with the patient, so I don't know if Angie wanted to say anything. I've kind of put her on the spot now, sorry, but if she had anything that she thought I missed out, then feel free to pop in, Angie.
I could just say that Chloe has been amazing treating this patient, and I think one of the things that really impressed me was the fact that it was her care and attention, because he'd been feeling suicidal for a very long time, and her going, it's like as if the treatment gradually allowed him to feel safe enough to tell her how bad he felt. And that really changed everything when he could say what was really, really going on with him. And his descriptions of his daughter kind of being with him and then rolling her eyes as he said things and saying how stupid he was, and that doesn't happen anymore. I think he's a really changed person. He used to have phlegm coming down the corners of his mouth as he spoke, and that none of that, he looks like he integrates into the community now, whilst before he stood out as a person who was a bit unusual and strange. So in those months, Chloe has made a huge difference to that patient, and I'm really impressed by what she's done.
Gosh, shucks, thanks, Angie.
Beautiful to hear. Yes, there has been. Can you just repeat? There's one question. She missed that. How long you'd been treating him and how many treatments? So just if you could repeat that.
I'm not sure how many exact treatments I've given him, but he came kind of mid-May, end of May, and I still have him now. So mostly it's every week, but it's not. It's he's been away or haven't been in, or so. It's kind of almost been every week, but yeah, so it's been quite a few months now.
Mm-hmm. Great. Just Josh, just to come back to you, how do you how is it going to be now for your second year? How do you continue?
With the student, so I'll be going into, I guess I think in March we start treating.
Okay.
Which will be kind of scary but very exciting at the same time. And I guess we'll be observing third year students rather than second years. And I know the college is quite keen to carry on using first year students observing second years.
Yep.
So I think I'll probably be observed as well, which will be terrifying. Going back to this again, no, just relax, Josh, it's a great experience for them.
And Chloe, how is that at your college? Are you at the moment just observed or led by a teacher? Do other students observe you?
So so I'm now in my pre-qualifying phase, so I've just gone into that. So now the supervisors are present kind of well, as much as you want them really. It's like towards the start, midway and towards the end, but you don't need points checked, and so because getting points checked can kind of obviously takes a lot of time, so that kind of smooths that transition. But prior to this, it was the supervisors go over the treatment plans. They you sort of tell them this is what you aim to do, but then obviously the patient comes in, you take their pulses, you get their feedback, you sort of talk to them and see their tongue. The supervisor does the same, and then you kind of interact and decide if the plan that you had made is still relevant or whether it needs to be changed. And then you will mark up your points, get them checked, then you needle. And again, at the start, when you're first needling, you have supervisors present, but as soon as they kind of see that you're capable, they don't have to be present for that. You do tend to have observers, but that's kind of, it's not all the time. It's kind of here and there. It depends on the size of the room that you've got, because of obviously COVID and everything. We kind of have if the people with the bigger rooms are the people that are getting observers. But what I will say is, as someone who's been observed, you just kind of, obviously certain observers are different, but it's another way for you to learn from what feedback they get, but it's also another way to kind of understand how to control the room and how to kind of work the room. And because it is your treatment room, and if you would prefer them, I guess, to kind of maybe ask questions at the end, you can always say that, and just sort of say, I'd feel much more comfortable if any questions that you want to ask her at the end, or if you've got anything you want to say now, let me know. Yeah, I guess it's all different, but it's not as scary as it seems. But it is, obviously, I know going into it, I remember being like, oh God, I've got an observer, but it's fine. It's fine.
Okay, good encouragement for
yeah,
Josh.
it's fine.
Josh, there has been actually a question for you from Susanna Lynch. Josh just wondering where the bladder 10 point was located. Great job with the presentation.
Which, sorry? The
Um,
bladder, the gallbladder 30?
no, yeah, that's for Josh.
Oh, sorry.
And the question is just wondering where the bladder 10 point was located.
Sure, so I don't know, I haven't covered that in my points classes yet, but it's at the back of the head.
Yes, I'm a little bit puzzled that someone asked about the location. Maybe they might want to know why it was used.
I think I know with the bladder channel, I think ICOM teaches some of the points differently, I think, which maybe is where the question's coming from.
Yeah, maybe. Yes. I mean, you were treating the water, weren't you?
Yeah.
So, and that's obviously the bladder channel is connected there. So, yeah, it may be that. Susanna, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question the way you thought, or the answer you wanted to, you were after, if you would like to. So she says that was why I asked. Yes, so why it was actually chosen. So okay, great, thank you. There has just been another question from Judith Blair. Chloe, was your patient in touch with mental health services?
Oh yeah, this is one thing I hadn't. So after he said all of that, I went away and kind of looked up what I need to be doing in order to kind of handle this and what the patient should be doing. So after he mentioned this, I looked at his local services and about having that community and the connections and having people to talk to. And when he came back, we asked him who he had, if he had people he could talk to, that he knew that he could speak to, you know, local services. And he did have a few people he could speak to, but it was kind of family and the odd friend, but I don't know how comfortable he felt talking to them. And I think he was aware of the services, but I think he kind of wanted to give it to us. But we did let him know that obviously he needs to have a support group. He needs to have someone that he can talk to, that he can call to if he's feeling. But luckily, since we've been treating him, he hasn't had that again. So hopefully it's all good now. But yeah, we did sort of tell him that he just needs to sort of have people that he knows that he can call at any time should there be an issue. So
thank you. Yeah. And I guess the work at the charity shop, you know, gives him that connection with other people. As
just, you know, the fact that it's a charity, obviously, as well. It's like I think it's local hospice. He's got that now. He's got the consistency. Things with his daughter are much better, I think, because he's not trying to get everything from that relationship. You know, he's not kind of hanging on her to kind of feel wanted, connected. You know, he's getting that from his job as well as treatment every week. And yeah, he's just building a better life for himself, and it's really nice to see.
It is interesting that you both treated men. You both treated fire.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of fire.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but still, obviously a lot of similarity, but also actually quite different.
Yeah.
And both coming in with initially musculoskeletal problems, which again is often why men appear in our clinics.
Yeah.
Any other issues are always more difficult to bring them in. But wonderful presentations. We still have a few minutes if there are any more questions. Is there anything you, Josh or Chloe, want to add to what you have said? How was it to prepare this presentation for today?
I'm not very good at presentations, but yeah, it was good. It was nice to go back over and sort of see the progress, because I'd recently done it for an assignment to look over the reflections of the patient, so that would already kind of happen, so that was good. But going back to the start and following it has been a really kind of nice way, and it also makes you kind of think, oh, maybe I'll try that next, or this could be, you know, so it's been really good. Bit nerve-wracking today, but it's been really good and really informative for me as well. So,
and writing it up maybe for a for a publication.
yeah, because you've got to really make sure that you believe in what you're saying.
Well, you know, it is, we are practitioners, and you are coming towards the end actually of your training, and every practitioner obviously has a slightly different take. That's quite, I think that's normal, that's the right thing.
Yeah.
We are all different, and we have a different connection to every patient. Right, there has been one more question from Nicola Cheshire. Chloe, can I ask how your patient reacted when you advised that you didn't want to treat his initial problem, that he came in for and treat his phlegm instead?
So obviously the first treatment was treatment on his main complaint, but because a lot of the points that I'd used, and also previous practitioners had used, were distal, as well as, you know, obviously some local, but there were distal points. And some of the stuff that I was doing was going to kind of link in with that fact that, you know, chi needs to be moved, and there was a lot going on with the wood, that it was already linked in. I kind of said to him that I'm focusing on your main complaint, but I didn't directly say I'm going to ignore your main complaint. I didn't say that. I just said I'm going to be using these points, and I feel that these will help you with your complaints. So I didn't sort of say I'm going to ignore that and do what I want to do. I was just like, you know, I'm going to do all the things I think will help you, rather than sort of tell them.
Great. Yeah. And there's one last thing being said by Lou Radford. I've been an acupuncturist for 30 years, and it was great to hear newbies. I'm very impressed and pleased to see the attention to detail and the broad overview Chloe has demonstrated, and Josh. I would be very happy to have her as my practitioner.
Oh, thank you.
Josh, in 2 years' time, 3 years' time.
Well, I'll be out in November, so.
So thank you both. Sorry.
It's really special as having students present here. I think it's that we can give our view. So thank you for having us.
Yes.
Well, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. And we have 5 minutes break, and in 10:15 the next presentation starts. Grab yourself a tea or coffee.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.